Welcome to our webinar on the role of culture in AI adoption. My name is Egbert Schram, and I'll kick off the session before Jaspar Roos will take over. And after our presentations, we'll dive into a panel discussion with 4 knowledgeable panelists. And then in the end of today's session, we will enable you to ask any question you want. You can already start posting texts and questions and comments in the comment section here in chat. Hi, Nadia. Thank you for setting a good example, dialing in all the way from Chile. I know Jaspar at the moment is in the Netherlands. Marc
Hello.
is in Luxembourg. Chris is in Australia. Michiel is in France, if I remember correctly. And I'm dialing in from Helsinki. So we have a very international crowd here together today. On that note, what is it that we're going to be talking about? Obviously, we're going to talk about culture. We're also going to talk about how does culture connect and relate to AI. Then we're going to dive in a little bit deeper in terms of what are some of the lessons learned from change and implementation practice in terms of what are best strategies for adopting AI inside your organization before we open it up to the panel and after that to the public. So a little bit about the culture factor, from whom you got a newsletter, or you might have seen this on our social media. As an organization, we've been around for the last, give or take, 40 years, and what we do is we make culture tangible. It's a word everybody knows. Everybody has an opinion on it, but opinions and facts are 2 different things, and we like to deal in facts. So that is our background. And these are just some of the examples of organizations that have experienced us. Now, when we talk about culture, it's important to understand straight up in the beginning, what actually is it that we mean with the word culture? And in the culture factor lingo, when we talk about culture in relation to organization, to work life per se, we distinguish 2 different mindsets. One mindset which reflects on culture from a national perspective, the more emotional attachments that we have to the things we see, the things we observe, the things we do not see. And then there is organizational culture, or you could call that the more rational perspective on culture. Do we work in a way that supports whatever strategy we have? And the beauty is when you start bringing these 2 things together. So this is our approach to culture. We look at culture as the coding of the mind, the programming of the mind, and then the practical consequences. So what does that matter in terms of work life consequences? So this is what we're going to dive in a little bit, explore a little bit more as well in the panel discussion. Now, what are the connections between culture and AI? If you think about some of the questions that we will touch upon during today, culture influences, first of all, how is AI developed? And in plenty of articles, and we will share the links in the slide presentation, we've pinpointed out that AI, especially the more common models that you're all aware of, so Gemini, ChatGPT, etc., are still rather culturally incompetent. So if the coding language of AI is based on incompetence, can we trust the results? This is an important question to reflect on. Another question is, when we read what AI provides us with, how do we accept that? How do we trust those results? How much fact-checking do we still do? And then the most important thing, and the main focus for today, how does it change the way we relate to work? How does it change the way we relate to our colleagues? Can AI be a colleague? What do we think about colleagues that use AI for everything they do? Are they still being creative and trustworthy, or are they just being lazy? Some of the things we're going to explore. Now, on that note, I'm going to hand over to Jaspar to walk us through some of the best practices that they have learned in their change and adaptation practices. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand it over to Jaspar. Jaspar, the floor is yours.
Good. And so first of all, welcome everybody. And I'm really happy, of course, that we can talk about this very relevant topic instead of only thinking about, okay, how can we change the world with tech, but also what's the human perspective on that and how can we adopt that? So we will not dwell too much on like the numbers and results of that, more give you some practical things that we hope that you might like. And again, we have plenty of time for that to think about that. So for us, we are in partnership with the Culture Factor. And for us, we see change happening. And we see the need for change when things are, of course, moving. And so we try not to focus on the common stuff, of course, which is out there as well, learning, awareness, all the items. But sometimes they don't work. And from different perspective, from our research chief human officer leading with AI, but also from a work perspective, we try to understand like how to make this better. And I think that's so these topics that we touch upon then. So the culture, the neuro and the neuroscience and tech. So we see that the culture defines, of course, how resistance appears. And so what we then see, or what we try to do, of course, to design for the brain. So what do people actually do in practice and adapt to that? And that can mean that we also have to touch upon like items that we all have as humans, like fear, overload, silence, feeling irrelevant or agnostic or everything like that. And so we do this in collaboration with a lot of institutes and parts on that. So I just want to share some of the practical parts on that. Because so with the moment we start to talk about, of course, like taboos, of course, like Voldemort, like in that movie, that the one who cannot be named. But then everybody thinks about that. Everybody thinks that, and everybody probably feels that. So that sometimes we have the loss which is out there that we don't like. And I think that's what we see, and what we see in an organizational culture. And for those who don't know this, a little bit, and the computer says no. So we see that, of course, when a person has to change, of course, it's perceived as a loss. And people don't like that. And that people have to do it alone. And that's why we see now more and more, of course, in the adoption phase of an organizational culture, that people have fears that they are afraid to share. And so that maybe that, I don't know, I don't understand this, or I don't trust it. And these assumptions, of course, they keep us back, which is not a good news. And so what we then also experience is that more and more disobedience happens. And that can be, I think there's also a big distinction on the white collar workers versus the blue collar workers. So I think that's a big difference what we see, is that people actually have this kind of like disobedience and more. And we think as linear people or with rational people, like, hey, people should act rational. But we see people are finding ways to escape that. And I think that's a topic, of course, where the Culture Factor and Limpid, of course, try to create like a meaningful solution for. It's like how to assess it and how to also to find a solution to help people do that. Because we see that we're supposed to love AI. Because it's new, it's flashy, it solves all kind of problems like cancer, and which is hopefully true. But again, it's also a tool. And again, like what we see is that people are willing to play with AI, but a lot of them are willing to lose their job, or that they fear that. And again, do I have a choice? I think these are things are very relevant. So what we did, we try to map these models, and this is part of the model that we collaborate with from Harvard Business School, that are 5 different kind of, so to say, categories that people fear. So it could be on the reduction of human control, that people feel the need or they're afraid that it's too autonomous or too inflexible. Emotionless as well, because somebody makes a conclusion in a very rational way, and so it may be that they don't understand the ethics or the social construct of why you could choose something else. And we also see is that the empathy is lacking in a lot of instances. And that long and all, so we see, of course, as well that there's awareness that people actually prefer like human interaction as well. Of course, hence we're here as well in a webinar, which is also with human interaction. And now, yes, I'm not a robot, so I'm real. So that's an Egbert. So we're all real people together with feelings on that. So we try to map those with like different levels, because again, we perceive that there are different levels in there, and that also, for example, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, or like they have different kind of feelings or fears about, for example, impact or purpose than people who, for example, are in a strategic position. So we see that there's really are different levels organization-wise, but also on people-wise. I think that's really interesting to see. So we came up with this model for ourselves, in which we try to understand. And as you can imagine, we started with 5 taboos, and then it became like 10 taboos, and stuff that we saw that people are not so willing to talk about, but they were there. And so we're now close to 100. So of course, it keeps on getting bigger, which is not necessarily intended to be that way. And so these are things that team members can have. And I've been a leader myself in many organizations, and it was difficult if people say, "How are you?" "I'm okay." "It's all good." "Okay, what do you mean?" But even already the man-woman like dialogue, of course. So who's from Mars, who's from Venus? And that's, of course, for us is to understand the taboos. If we understand the taboos and of the objections that sometimes have for people to change, if the moment we can really make a change on that, that will all be better. So I just want to give you some examples that we have been doing in a way to break open the taboo. And a taboo is something, of course, which a lot of energy hidden in there, and sometimes for a reason. And the taboos in organization A can be different than organization B, but even within organization A, the finance department can be different from the sales department and everything else. And so what we have been doing for the last 15 years is putting in interventions. And as you can see, provocative interventions. It's like a joke that we have, like a man goes to a doctor. You all know these kind of jokes. Or an Irishman, an Englishman, and a Pakistani go to a bar. Things like, okay. So what is going to happen? And so we see, of course, that we have been researching a lot the role of humor and play. So how to apply that to unlock energy that has been hidden for a reason. And so we try to create energy levels, or like we try to understand what a scientist does, or what happens in the brain, and how to apply that. Just to give you a small example about the applausometer. So we know, for example, when you clap your hands, you get energy. And there's this big saying, emotion is created by motion. So once we want to get more involvement into decision making, so we can have like all kind of like the regular change processes, but we can also have an applausometer. Like cheers, much you care, woo, yeah. And then, of course, I get more energy, I get more oxygen in my brain, so I get more relaxed, and probably for some of you more crazy that I get. But I think that's really interesting to see how to make also the change. And so sometimes we need to add a little bit of provocation in that. So I just want to give you some other examples. So this, for example, in a banking culture, and you can imagine, of course, this type of culture. And we try, of course, to understand like, what do people need, of course, to make the change. And so one of them could be where a bank, for example, typically the uniform is your suit, of course, it's very good for people also to dress up in a different way. So people can actually step into the persona and actually have the role playing. And that's like, you can ask them to do that, but if you, the moment they dress up differently, that's a very simple principle that happens. People become the persona. And that's interesting what we see in organizations. To give you another example, we've seen this with a large company in which they had like an online desire to come together. And so we said, okay, let's include that, but also get the physical swag. So people love it when digital becomes so prominent. It's good to have something physical. And that's, of course, the role that we try to play with that. And that we see is that people, when everything comes like regular, like digitalization, then everything that becomes physical, like meeting up or like showing up to the office, that becomes special again. And these are then the levers for change. It's the same at the coffee machine. So at the coffee machine, you have the opportunity to talk to each other. I like to improve the water cooler effect. So we've seen this as well, for example, in multinational organizations. There's a law firm in which we added like pub quizzes. Of course, this is from an Arabic world, so this is a bit more was a pub quiz. And the thing that we did, and for those who read the news, there are sometimes tensions between some of the countries in the Middle East. So we added a big prize for the one who could win that. Can you imagine when Qatar won from Saudi Arabia, like the pub quiz? Can you imagine on their values how much proud they had, and in a fun way? And so that's what we try to understand. So if we have like an assessment of the culture, like for example from the culture factors, saying hey, this culture or that organization culture is different, how then to make sure it actually moves into the direction that you want to do? And so funny enough, like these kind of items like breakfast meetings, that really makes it work. So this is a recent one, and it's also on AI adoption. So we created scratch cards. So you can see them on my screen. These are actual scratch cards, and of course you had to go to the website to learn about AI. And so we made a competition that people actually could do the exercise and the learnings, but you had to scratch it. And that's really interesting principle, is that the more that we see how people actually do things in real life, that's very attractive. So we've seen this as well at organizations where 80% of the people were in a blue collar kind of like type of work, factories or a lot of logistics. And like 80% of them, so they could not be reached from headquarters because they wanted to have this change. They said this is how the culture is and how it should be, but how to make them change. So we apply these simple kind of technologies, which everybody understands typically, actually to make it work. And that's really also in the car or on the place, or and again, that's really for an easygoing work discipline to get it going. It's the and it's a great lever for stuff. And what we saw is that the results were actually pretty high and pretty positive, and a very simple, like low-tech way. So anyway, so what you see, and I think that's at least the point that we want to leverage in this case. So there are so many ways, of course, that some people may say, is this childish or not? Or is it like crazy or not? To us, it's not. Because sometimes we want to get to somewhere and we need to understand, of course, what are the best ways to do so. And one of the things that we know, if we want to get the change work, or in this case, AI adoption going, then there is sometimes resistance. So we need to understand that, and we need to make the motion happening. And that's why we can do the emotion. We have to like provoke people a little bit sometimes. So we know that the regular change methods, a lot of time they work, but sometimes we need to add stuff. And so what we do, and again, that's the thing, what I see in how to create a quick fix to a better society. So this is different, and it's not always better. But we also know that better is always different. And I guess that's what we hope to achieve also, like in sharing you the principles and the practice that we've shown are really just like everybody gets it. And that's good news. Simplicity is key in this. Egbert, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jasper. And I can already see in the chat a very nice interaction there between Nick and Michiel in terms of pub quiz versus pop quiz in cultures where people might not necessarily drink. This is one of those very good observations on how culture can influence the design, for example, of workshops. So be very mindful of that. Glad that was clarified in the chat. Now, the important part for today, post the presentation done by Jaspar and myself. We have a panel of 4 specialists. And why is it that we started doing this webinar? Because from practical experience, assessing how culture might influence change, in this case, adaptation of AI or any other new technology, will help you to understand what type of intervention might actually work. Now, that is the specialty of the culture factor group, the analytical part, and making sure that it fits to the strategic needs of the organization. The adaptation part, as I think Jaspar has made very, very nicely clear, is a skill on its own. And that is where Limpid & Co., Jaspar's organization, specializes, making that change actually work in an interactive way. Now, let's dive into the panel discussion. As usually, we have prepared the panelists with a couple of questions. But before we get into the questions, I would like to have every panelist shortly introduce themselves. So I'll start on the left-hand side of my screen, Marc, then Chris, then Michiel. We'll finish up with Jaspar, and then I'll take the word back to pose the questions. Marc.
Thank you, Egbert. Good afternoon, morning, evening again to all of you. So my name is Marc Jacobs. I live in Luxembourg. I'm an engineer, so I have a fairly technical mind. Hence, the whole quantitative numbers-driven approach that we have is close to my heart. I have decades of experience in businesses ranging from startups all the way up to large global conglomerates. And in all these environments, the aspects of culture extremely important. Hence, this is my focus area now since the last 10 years. So that's about me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marc. Let's go over to Chris. Chris from Down Under. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Egbert, and thanks for having me, everyone. My name's Christopher Organ. I'm the Managing Director of the Culture Factor of the Australasia region, which is Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, and Indonesia. My background is very much hasn't been very much formally in culture, but the work that I've done across the world in transformation has required me to navigate cultural differences and also assemble teams of people and find out ways of working that's going to assist an organization or a group achieve its strategy. Um, and since I've been working with the culture factor, we're able to put some structure and analytics around that to shortcut the process of making things work. Thanks. That's me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. So back to Europe, Michiel, dialing in from France.
France, yeah,
Yes.
beautiful France. I'm Michiel, which is impossible to pronounce for most of you, but don't worry about it. I've been working as a change management professional for a long time, and I specialize in making the link between the more instrumental strategic change and how it affects humans, which is basically what we try to do, as Jaspar showed at Limpid and Co. So making change real and making it meaningful to the people who are part of it. So that's what brought me here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michiel. And we've got some special questions for you too. Jasper, would you like to add on to your initial introduction?
So at least the funny thing is, like, and that's how things can go. So I remember that Mark and I talked around LSE and like how to, so like, can you spice up a little bit some of the part of the course? Of course, people. So I had a classical education for computer science to banking, but again, I love the human element in that, and that's. So I think that it's really the good times right now that we start to understand that the tech is the tool. And of course, the tool we can use, and that's of course I do a lot of stuff in the tech world, but especially like it when we can humanly interact, because the humanism, of course, that is the new black, I would say.
Thank you, Jasper. So on my end, I'll just finish my introduction with a bombshell. I'm a forester. So what do I know about people? Basically, my favorite passion is to understand how people interact with one another, whether that be a forest, a tree, or an organization. But I promised the guys that I won't be the main speaker today. I'll just be the moderator. So I got the honor to ask nasty questions, and those are obviously rehearsed. So for those of you amongst the audience, we will now spend, give or take, 25 minutes questioning the panelists. And that gives you 25 minutes to come up with nasty questions, interesting questions, spicy questions, whichever you feel comfortable putting down in the Zoom chat. As said, the session is recorded, so be mindful of that. Post the session, as a reminder, we will share the recording with all of you, as some of you dialed in a little bit later, so you might have missed a little bit of the beginning, but no worries, that recording will come to you early next week. On that note, the first question I'm going to ask is following up on Jasper's closing statement in terms of technology. Now, Chris, you've worked across the globe in many tech companies, and them being kind of tech companies, you would expect them to kind of lead the way in terms of adaptation of new stuff. Have you seen elements of their corporate cultures, national cultures that have helped adaptation? What has been your experience?
Sure. I guess a time a tech company gets brought in to help with change, it's not just to introduce the tech, it's to introduce some sort of business improvement, some sort of customer experience improvement or internal efficiency improvement. And I guess what helps those tech companies be successful is a set of characteristics which help an organization reconfigure itself, whether it be the way that they're working or the way that their tech needs to operate. And typically that requires, I guess, everyone who's involved with a project like that to reconfigure themselves. with something like AI, and I don't think it's been any different in the past with the introduction of, I don't know if anyone remembers the hype around CRMs and ERP systems. It was very similar, where it was promised that it was the silver bullet for your efficiency or customer experience problems. But what happened when tech companies or internal IT departments started to roll these things out, they quickly realized that the impact it was having on people, their way of working, their jobs, how they were adding value to an organization, and then they started to hit resistance. And so a culture of an organization that is prepared for transformation using technology is usually the one that will help grease a project like that through to the other side. And when I say grease it through the other side, only thing I'd like to add there is, I guess sometimes right at the beginning of a project like that, there is a requirement of the organization to be very creative about what the future looks like. And then at some point in the project, the rubber hits the road, and detail's important, discipline's important, costs starting to be looked at a lot more deeply. So in a way, things need to change at some point. And we find this with all the tech companies I work with, is that juxtaposition between how do we be creative and disciplined at the same time? And we know that it's very difficult to be both. So the question is, what's the right balance?
So to summarize, would you argue that an organization that is prepared in terms of understanding how change ready they are would be instrumental for implementing any kind of tech, whether that be AI or an ERP?
Yes, I think so. I think knowing who you are as an organization is really important. And I'll go as far as say, yes, we'd love people to be ready, but typically they're not. But they don't know they're not either. And sometimes spending the time up front to really know who you are, how prepared you might be for change, what change impact is going to happen, and how do you create the cultural supporting settings to make sure that, first of all, your project's going to be successful and your project team are going to be supported. And then when that change is actually implemented, what is the culture difference that's going to be required to support the ongoing success of the implementation?
Yeah. Jaspar, if I ask you to comment on this, we saw the question in the chat from Alejandro, which is, I think, also connected a little bit to what Chris just mentioned. Have you seen in your practice situations whereby that organization being clear about who they are, their identity, was instrumental in making sure that they were able to bite the bullet, so to say, and engage in change?
Yeah, so I think of course, first of all, just on the feedback here. So Alejandro, I think that's the comment that you gave, right? That's when you're referring to, Egbert, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and so just to give you an example, so this is actually, I just want to check upon it, and I think it's good. And of course, right now, of course, in terms of time, we decided not to dive too much into all the reasons behind it. Just to give you an example, that of course that's sometimes a business challenge. And so first of all, so we see a lot of organizations when we talk to their board, of course, they have decided to use AI in the organization. And sometimes we don't know why, or because it's just cool, or because it's relevant, or somebody told them it would be very successful. So first of all, of course, we notice is that it happens. Of course, like Chris already mentioned earlier, that happened the same with CRMs. That happened the same with blockchain. And remember the days 20 years ago when every company had to be .com, because then you get higher listings. So we have seen this in the market happening for a long, long time. So first of all, let's say, so a lot of the times we don't know why people do it, but they say because others do it, because our shareholders demand it. And so again, that's something that we see. But just to give you an illustration of an insurance company that we're now trying to help out. So there's a need. There's a technical use case why organizations say want to have like AI, like the call centers, and that's on the customer workflow, and so that's a big issue for a lot of them because they cost money because these are humans on the phone. And so one of the things we have seen a lot in that there's a business case to say, okay, we can automate this. We can make that chatbot, we can make it work. And we can save like amount of the people times the many years. So we can actually pretty quickly make money. So that's typically a use case for people to get rid of, for companies to get rid of people, and of course to the cost side is ineffective. So what we've seen there is that the project leader then involved with trying to get the people to say, hey, you're the turkey for Christmas. Because you're like on the menu, but can you help out making us those bots, those chatbots? A lot of people say, yeah, okay, but like, yeah, but I think the interface is not working, or that is not working, or that doesn't work, or that doesn't do. And so that's why, so we started to uncover that is that a lot of the items that people say actually are not the things that people actually do. And so that's very attractive with taboos or with fears that people have. They will not tell it, not necessarily about themselves. They will share this only about like my work. So I'm totally okay with this reorganization, but my work, of course, cannot be changed. But that work can be changed. So in the end, you have like a merry-go-round of people saying, yes, well, my work cannot, but those can do. And I think that's a topic that we've seen a lot, in which we then try to say we need to understand from an assessment, like from the culture factor, on like what is the culture and what are the obstacles that people have. So it could be that they just had a bad experience from the year before, or they have this movement of bohica. Bohica is a concept that a lot of people experience who are not in the strategy team. Bohica is like bend over, here it comes again, a new transformation, a new strategy, and so people fear that then like. They don't get it because they don't understand the new values. And so they're just like, I just have to do my work. So again, what we see, so AI is typically a tool, of course, which has become a strategy. And then people try to push it. So there could be very valid reasons for that. It could also be that the people then, that the execution is falling behind. So that's why we know we need to help them first understand what is sometimes the obstacles. And it could be like the previous boss that was an asshole, or sorry for my French, or like not so nice. It could also be that they just don't get it because it's a new literacy. It is a new language that people speak. So then you can say to them, learn this, go to LinkedIn Learning. But these things don't work typically. Because people are fearful and they are behind the laptop and they don't.
So it's giving people space to basically be felt, be heard, be listened to. Yeah.
This mental space that is needed.
I'm going to jump in on that with a question to Michiel. So Michiel, in Jaspar's presentation, there are a couple of nice examples of practical change ideas. What made you come up with these initiatives? Because normally not a single one of us hits the road with immediate success. So what were the lessons learned that made you come up with the ideas that you now know work?
Well, the strange thing about this is that people think when we do fun, weird stuff, is that we're just fun, weird guys, which we are. But it's actually quite a rigorous process that we follow. Also linking to Alejandro's question, we really start by what is the goal we want to achieve? Who do we want to reach out to? Using things like culture assessments, and what exactly is the challenge that these people face? Because as Jaspar said, that might be very different. They might not understand, they might not like it, they might be touched by it personally, they might be uncertain. So by following a rigorous process and combining that with knowledge of neuroscientific things that might work, and our experience in doing things differently, we can come up with different things. But the main thing is we just don't go and improvise. Because if you do that, you'll hit more than you'll miss more than you'll hit. Yeah. And it's definitely what just like Alejandro asked, if you don't know why you're doing something, and we see this a lot in AI adoption, people say we have to do something with AI. And if that's your goal, well, maybe it's a good first step. But then we say, okay, so let's go do something. And we can make it fun, but it's not going to be very effective.
Yeah, Michiel, do you feel that in your experience, as following up, seeing Christie's question there in the chat, is this something specific to AI, or is this specific in general to change management?
So it's very general for change, and maybe even more for technology change, like Chris said, because change is if it's more social change, it feels closer to home. You can relate to it more easily. If it's technological change, it's like the bots are coming. It's strange. It's impersonal. It's an extra level of discomfort that is added. Because also, I don't know about you, but for instance, I still get really mad at ChatGPT for not answering my question correctly. So I'm expecting human interaction, which I'm never going to get from a tech solution. So that would makes interaction with technology a little bit uncanny,
Yeah.
and that increases the emotional aversion a bit.
Yeah, and I
Yes,
think
Jaspar?
yeah, maybe to add to that. So first of all, again, also for Christy and so we've developed over the last 15 years a lot of like exercises, and of course where we try to do this in applied research together with universities. Of course, they did the hard work, of course, and we said let's try this in practice. Let's do this at Meta or do this at LinkedIn or whatever these companies, and let's try to find ways for that. And of course, the bigger the difference is of what works or what doesn't work, of course, the more attractive it gets. Stuff we've done in Mexico is different than in Saudi Arabia or in Germany. So they all have different kind of cultures. Well, I don't need to tell you like that. And of course, so some of these ones work, some of them don't work. But so I showed a picture of the slide, like a slide in the office. So it was really good. So the slide, of course, doesn't have any function other than like discussing the way of work. Because people were like arguing together, like, "Hey, I'm sitting behind my laptop, and that is what work is called." And then the leader could finally have the conversation like, okay, but what we define as work? That you just have 9 hours behind your desk or that you're actually conversing with people. So, of course, the means to an end, of course, we design the experiments that actually then, of course, to get into the culture that you desire.
Yeah.
And some of them can be in line, some of them provocative. And so
it's a nice way basically to indirectly get people to rethink the way in which they work.
exactly. And so for AI, of course, a lot of these interventions don't work. But again, so what we have seen, of course, in the past with change, for example, if a company gets taken over or gets outsourced, then different fears happen. But here, of course, what we see is that people actually, it goes so fast, people feel overwhelmed. And that's a common thing with, of course, with technological change. But especially with AI, of course, it's so much the hype out there in the market that people think that the prospect of things are so general, but people don't understand it on a like an individual level. So the gap is so big. So we have to, so a lot of things like I mentioned with the customer contact centers, we have to identify like means and tools and methods for the people individually to cope with that. Because that's a big change. So those people only have 5 minutes a day on like working, like doing some learning. And so they feel like a robot. So how to make people understand that? And that's why AI is a little bit more impactful, because not only it talks about work, but also what is my role? Or what did I learn? What did I lose if I'm like a registered controller in a finance department? And if then people say, you can be automated, of course people will say, what?
I'm gonna jump in on that because you mentioned an important thing here, and I'm gonna pose therefore a question to Marc. So Marc, you've worked in a variety of industries, including manufacturing industries, which are not necessarily known to be fast adapters. However, in the manufacturing world, robotization has been going on already for quite a while. And you would say that could be the physical equivalent of AI in terms of automating ways of working, whether that be physical ways or mental ways. How do you see that the culture of an organization, and perhaps even more importantly, the national cultures involved, influence that change readiness?
That's a very good question, Egbert. So indeed, in my experience, I've long experience in executive management of manufacturing companies. If you look at it first through the lens of organizational culture, they are they're very much process driven. Once something is developed, it's established, and you keep doing it for a long time. And there have to be very good reasons before you change anything. And And so there isn't a mentality of easy change, of adaptation to new things. And that's anchored in the core of that business, and it's absolutely normal. As an anecdote, I recently had a conversation with somebody from about AI adoption in say an industrial tech company, and the answer that I got is like, it's actually forbidden to use AI in our company, and that for me was actually quite shocking, because this was a company in a country that is high uncertainty avoidant to link it back to national culture. So now you have this combination of high uncertainty avoidant national culture environment, and also very much, let's say in our lingo of organizational culture, a very means-driven organization rather than a very goal-driven organization. And the combination of those two creates like firewalls against AI adoption. So how to get through that is an interesting challenge. But first of all, in the end, if then an organization in that environment, in a means-driven environment and a high UAI environment, if it decides that there are use cases to implement AI, because that's the starting point, there have to be meaningful use cases. And I'd like to add that makes sense to the people in the organization, because if those use cases don't make sense to the people in the organization, well, good luck, frankly. But how do you know that? And you know that by starting with an assessment, both on what is our current organizational culture, does our national culture enhance certain aspects of that, etc. So this is assessment first, then implementation.
So understand where you are, what are your obstacles, what are your pivoting points to move forward.
What's your level of change readiness? What are the elements of fear?
No, you just mentioned there a very important word, the word fear, and we saw it in the chat earlier, fear of missing out. And this will be my closing question to the panelists in terms of the question you knew was coming in order to make you feel comfortable. And after this, we're going to open up with the public question. So, and Marc, I'll just start with you because you used the word, or you dropped the word fear. In your decades of experience, how important is the role of psychological safety for people to change?
It can't be overstated. And it's if you don't feel safe in your environment, if you don't trust that also your environment, your organizations is also going to look out for you, why would you even support any element of change, any new technology that comes in, especially one there's a big perception of it might take away my job, it might even become a colleague, in the future, it might move beyond just being a tool. That's a scary concept.
So you would judge it's of essential importance. Michiel, Jaspar, Chris, would you argue the same? That first make sure that you know that people are feeling psychologically safe before ever thinking about talking about big things like change and AI?
Well, I think what we try to do is, this is definitely very important, to create a safe environment for everybody to feel secure in, especially if we talk about taboos. And this is one of the reasons we use playful humor to create this. And also we try to break up things into smaller pieces, because you can't boil the ocean. You have to take small steps to create the safety, that you can see which areas you can already go to without being too far out for people to feel uncomfortable. But it's definitely a big thing to take into account. Yeah.
Michiel, Jaspar, Chris, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I can add something. Even a recent example of a cybersecurity team. Cybersecurity is traditionally quite a hands-on thing. It's a lot of things to check, a lot of configuration work to do. you're checking logs. There's a very, very manual process. And this is something that AI is incredibly good at, is identifying patterns. And the latest cybersecurity technology now is mostly all AI driven. So a lot of people that have been working even in cutting edge cybersecurity is that there is way too much work to do. So they've had to reconfigure themselves and the way of working around AI. And this has been forced upon them. So the really successful organizations have elevated their people where AI is doing the heavy lifting. Their role has really been reconfigured to check that AI is doing what it's meant to be doing, improving AI and training AI, and also looking ahead and looking much further in advance about what potential threats could be coming into the organization to prevent them happening rather than responding to them like they were doing before. So it really does create an opportunity, but I guess as a leader of an organization, as a group, is really to help people make that adjustment about the way that they're thinking about their work and how they add value.
Yeah, and I think thanks, Chris, for that answer, because I think it also connects nicely to Lisbeth's questions there in the chats in terms of AI requiring a fundamentally different, like an approach to what does work actually mean. And I think, Jaspar, you also already earlier touched upon it in terms of what is work. Is work sitting behind your laptop? Is work sliding down that slide? But Jaspar, you mentioned something, and then after that I'll come also to Tony's reflection on the average age in this panel, myself excluded because I'm a millennial, so I'm excused. But Jaspar, in your your example of the slide and that definition of work, what type of culture do you feel has to be present for people to actually engage in what some might say, yeah, but that's childish behavior. We don't need a slide at work, or we don't need a lake full of plastic balls, so to say. How comfortable does the organization need to be to engage in this?
Of course, the examples that we have given, of course, are a bit more visually oriented. So first of all, of course, so we could also do like the stuff we did at other organizations which are different. But this, of course, was more like a quick overview to show the breadth and the depth of like items. And again, we have seen this happening at, for example, a company like Swift, like the banking system, which is very, like in Brussels and Eupen, is a very, of course, solid organization that requires different kind of activities than like an AI-based company. So we've seen, of course, both sides of the spectrum where people are needed. So in the end, of course, you want to have this digital or AI mindset, where people think indeed in like, hey, can I use something that is of relevance for me, and how can I do that? And so one of the things that we have seen is in the past, all the ATKA, UTAM, like the adoption models, whether it's for Salesforce or for technological development, they maybe used to work, but now at least there's something that people have fears of, which are like not yet clearly described in most organizations. And so we think that because, okay, I'm a leader, I've studied this or that, so that other people would feel the same. And the good news with AI, of course, you can make it really personal. And that's also, of course, but we see it when it's fake. So when we get a message, like a sales message, like, hey, how are you doing? Hey, Jaspar, I got this last week. I got all kind of messages via LinkedIn. And I was like, okay, I don't know you. And so, of course, when the personalization doesn't work, it really doesn't work. So long story short, what we see, of course, is that organizations where a person or like where a leader is able to let their employees talk about things that go wrong or things that could be solved, and whether it's like a Monday meeting where people say, okay, these things did not work, or what do you feel about the implementation? How can you contribute yourself? And that I would say that in a bit more inclusive, of course, inclusive culture which is out there, of course, they are more open to change. Because in the end, we know that we need to have like people from the outside, of course, to challenge your thinking. And so the more you get like relaxed on that, the more you sit on your own pile of like your gold, pile of gold. So people may say, okay, I get easy on that. I don't care about that. So for us, of course, when I started it with research on humor, was in 2008 and 9. Remember, those were the days when banking just like collapsed. So I wanted to find answers how to get those people from fearing, like, I don't get what's happening, to, okay, let go. Let go and do that. And we see now these waves coming back. And a lot of the principles that we see in regular change management, they still apply. But of course, they are too vague and too distant. So people need to get their hands, and they need to get in the physical, and they need to be able to go outside and breathe and to think in a more open way.
Jumping on that, so Jasper, you just mentioned a year, 2008. Of course, we soon have people that were born in that year entering the workspace, and that also relates to Tony's question there. All of you, the other panelists, are Gen X, maybe even baby boomers. Now, I'm an old millennial, so I said I'll excuse myself. But how do you keep up as older people with all of these changes that are happening with regards to AI? And then I'll give the millennial answer after that.
So one thing about that, Egbert, that is, I don't know about the other panelists, but my work has been very tech supported or driven all my life. So, I mean, maybe our parents were new to be introduced to technology, but we are not. Also, I have a 20-year-old daughter. I see that I'm way more tech savvy than she is. So that's one thing. And also we see that in the AI transition, it's about the loss that you risk. And so people who are like more end of career, they are quite happy, often embracing AI, because they can see how it can help them, and they are quite confident that it won't take away their job before they retire. Same thing might happen to a 20-year-old who enters a workspace, who is reasonably well versed in the technology and grows with it. Actually, the middle group, I would almost say the older millennials, if you don't, are the ones who seem to have most to lose, because they've been educated in a world before AI, learned to work, we work with engineering firms, with people who just know how to design stuff by hand and things. And they have a lot of experience and education that they tend to lose a lot on, because a lot of their education might be taken over. So it's not quite as linear as people seem to think, that the older the more difficult. And even the old guys like me, we still have some sense of how things work digitally, and that's what the younger generation just take it for granted. So sometimes we're at an advantage there, actually.
Yeah. I'm thinking, also being mindful of the time, Tony, thank you for asking the question. I know you have a book coming out, I believe it's next week. So if you, congratulations already on that. If you wish to share the title of the book in the chat, do feel free. You have 48 people that can then potentially buy your book. Now, let's see. There is a couple of more questions so that we can try to answer as many questions as possible today. So question here, Nick. Thank you, Nick, for the recent chat. How good is AI at identifying the correct balance between AI contact versus human contact with customers and fellow staff? Now, I like this question a lot, because here in the Nordics, we just had a case of a well-known payment provider called Klarna, who had fired all 700 people in their support team, only to rehire most of them 3 months later because customers were revolting. They didn't want to talk to the machine. They wanted to talk to people. Chris, what's your perspective on this? And you touched upon it earlier as well in some of your examples.
Well, look, this is a really interesting one. I think especially challenging for organizations that I guess their strategy is, fixated on maybe cost reduction, and, without potentially really understanding what customers value about the way that they're serviced by their business. And so, for example, this is a really good one, I think, from Nick, is what's the right balance between the two? And I don't know how many times I've been frustrated by getting a bot pop up on the screen only to not only not answer my question, but it wouldn't put me through to a human being, and it could get incredibly frustrating. Yet I've had other interactions with bots which were really good when I said I need to do something, and it's been able to do it by itself, which meant that my problem got solved really quickly. So I think it really is about really understanding the customer experience you want to provide, and then what's the right mix that you might need to make that happen. So yes.
Now, being mindful of time, I think I'll summarize it at that stage. I think I'll refer back to Mark's comment in terms of the key success factor, as in with previous initiatives regarding tech change and change in general, is first measure. Understand where the organization stands, understand where the management stands, let the management understand why is it that they want to have AI. Also be mindful of the risks, building on some of the examples regarding cybersecurity, being mindful of how sensitive, how touchy-feely is the organization. So if we want to introduce more playful methods, can we do that straight off the bat, or do we first need to kind of grind that in a little bit because people might not be outright ready? Now, this is obviously a topic that changes so fast because AI today isn't the same as AI half a year ago, nor will it be the same today as it is going to be in half a year from now. So let's see where we are in half a year from now. We would really like to thank everybody for spending your time with us. We would also like to remind you that Jaspar and Michiel are during this summer recording a podcast series about the human side of AI, and they are looking for volunteers. In the slides and the recording that we will be sharing with you, as mentioned, the contact details of all of us will be shared with you. So if you're interested in speaking on this topic, please do reach out to Jaspar and Michiel. Now, for those of you that are adventurous and like to explore the perhaps already explored, but still perhaps somewhat new, I happily invite you to join us in our conference in Lagos, Nigeria on November 7th, where we're going to talk more about how can we as organizations remain future ready in the eye of ever faster developing technological features. We have a whole range of keynote speakers present. You can see some of them here, a couple of the financial sector, but also the International Rescue Community, various business schools, representations, etc. So if you don't have travel plans yet, then strongly recommended to attend. Typically, this Culture Factor conference that we organize every year has about 150 to 250 participants. This is going to be Nigeria, so it's going to be bigger. We're aiming for 400 attendees, and we count on at least some of you making your way there. On that note, once more, my sincere thanks to all of you on behalf of everybody on the panel today. With that being what the time says, which is it is 1 minute, you will see Tony's link in the chat to his book on AI and basically generations. The conference link you have here in the chat as well. And on that note, I thank you very much. We like to deliver in time, on time, and with 1 minute to go, we have hopefully been successful in that. Thank you so much, and looking forward to being in touch with you afterwards. Cheers and goodbye.